Music has a way of impacting and reflecting our lives in a lot of ways. Music uplifts us, music depresses us, music enlightens us, music brings us joy, music brings us happiness, sadness, melancholy, nostalgia. But it can also change the way how we see it in its entirety. For this week's video, I'm going to be discussing the 4 albums that have changed my life and changed the way I viewed and valued music altogether. Of course, there are more albums that have changed and changed the way I've seen music and viewed it, but on this video, I'm going to be mentioning just 4 because if I was to mention all of them, then I think this would have been like a 5-hour video. Can we get much higher? So high. My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy by Kanye is the first album I chose for this video, and it's an album where historical context is very much important, especially for this album. At this point of time for Kanye's career, it was one of the most tumultuous times of his life. Controversy from the Taylor Swift incident, breakup with Amber Rose, his tour with Lady Gaga being cancelled, the mixed reviews of his previous album, him being overworked. A lot was going around during the makings of this album. An enormous amount of hate was going towards Kanye. Mos Def even told Kanye to leave the country entirely to escape the hate and the rage against Kanye. I remember the Taylor Swift moment on TV, and I remember the magazine covers, and I remember just the enormous amount of just negative backlash Kanye got at the time. It was too crazy. And I think for a lot of Kanye fans at the time, I think his fans probably viewed it as the end for him. But that didn't happen, and what Kanye made was one of the greatest albums ever conceived by man. For starters, this album has some of the most detailed music productions from a Kanye album, with his in-house producers on his album like Mike Dean, Kanye obviously, S1, Bink, Q-Tip, No ID. The production is warm, it's very much in your face. It reminds me of like a Jackson Pollock painting. From the triumphant horns on All of the Lights, the gorgeous melodies of strings on this album, as well as in Devil in a New Dress, the soul samples, the prog rock influence, the drums. Kanye's best lyrical performance resides on this album as well, and it is truly groundbreaking. The song Lost in the World is one of the many moments in the album where it feels like your soul is literally escaping your body as you listen. Runaway is a top 5 Kanye song in my opinion, and Power is one of the greatest singles to ever release. The features on this album are exceptional as well, like Nicki Minaj, Rick Ross, Jay-Z, Pusha T, Raekwon, RZA, Kid Cudi, Rihanna. It's so much, so many more. The features were very essential to this album, and contributions by people like Nicki Minaj and Rick Ross really made this album shine, and it also gave them a little bit of shine as well. Like, I don't think Nicki Minaj is not going to talk about her monster verse on this album, and it's kind of weird because, you know, it's not her album, but in like every interview she has to talk about that monster verse, and she has to talk about the making of that album because it's just so great and legendary. Even people like Kid Cudi and Pusha T and Raekwon and RZA, they all talk about this album in their interview. It's like if they were making a movie, and rightfully so, because this album is so great that it all ties into their musical careers, and that's what makes this album kind of unique to me. The themes Kanye talks about on this album are interesting as well, like sex and race and celebrity, especially in the main theme of this album being how being a celebrity isn't as exciting or as something to fantasize as you may think it is. Re-listen to Nicki Minaj's opener on Dark Fantasy. Actually, now that I'm on to it, I need to talk about the album's title, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, because when I re-listened to this album, I really had to sit down and really say, okay, let me think about this album's title. My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. What does it mean? I said to myself in my head. My 2 conclusions that probably don't make sense, but I'll say it anyway, is number 1. Does Kanye want us to view his life more like a fantasy, sort of like a fantasy character or a story, like it's not real? Or 2, does Kanye want us to believe that his lifestyle and his celebrity status is worth fantasizing and glamorizing over, something that we should all hope to gain when in reality is dark and twisted. I'm probably thinking too deeply on its meaning, but tell me what you guys think down below in the comments. When I was rereading the lyrics for this album in preparation for this video, I forgot how dark and sorrowful and just sad Kanye was during this album.
How you say broke in Spanish, me no hablo. Me drown sorrow in that Diablo. Me found bravery in my bravado.
The imagery that I have for this album, I compared it to like an emperor or king sort of sitting upon his throne and who has defeated all of his odds and is at the peak of his creative abilities and artistic abilities. And while he's ravishing and sitting upon his throne filled with fame, excess, and power, he still deals with things like isolation and alienation and heartbreak. And he has a hollowed heart that beats for things like family, love, comfort, and understanding. And while he wants that, and to attain that, he still goes off on the wrong foot and he's still alone at the end of the day. It sort of makes him kind of human. The reason why I included My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy on this list is because this album symbolizes to me like a degree of perfection. And everything that I do and work on, like in my videos and thumbnails and editing, I really try to make it and put it on, like, because I have dark fantasy at like this level of perfection and masterpiece that everything I make, I want it to be on that type of level. That is because of Kanye's genius, his lyrical ability, and godly production, that it has changed how I view the music, and it's such a fantastic listen. The Velvet Underground's debut album, The Velvet Underground and Nico, is one of the most polarizing and weirdest albums that I have ever heard in my entire life. I've come across to listening to this album after seeing it in every greatest list poll and every greatest albums ever poll, and I decided to let me just give this album a try. I listened to the opener of this album Sunday morning, and I was attracted to the sweet, soft piano bell type of sound. I like the sleepiest vocals on the song. I really like the strings and the overall vibe to it. I kind of thought it was going to be like this psychedelic rock sort of 1960s Tame Impala record, and I thought it was going to sound like that throughout this entire album, but that's not what happened. Lou Reed, who is seen to be the leader and lyricist and main vocalist of the group, really enthralled me with his lyrics and unique vocal style that sounds like he is literally just talking. Lou really illustrates the hippie or junkie lifestyle of the late 1960s with his lyrics on this album in such a brutally honest way. Songs like I'm Waiting for My Man and Heroin really details drug abuse on this album that was very entertaining to me. Lou Reed uses visual imagery so perfectly on this album, and when I listen to this album, I envision a sort of low-budget 1960s X-rated movie that details the life of junkies and hippies surrounded by the rot-infested NYC life with sex, drugs, and prostitution everywhere. In terms of album production and instruments, they use very normal, widespread rock guitar, rock music instruments at the time, like an electric guitar, bass, drums. But what sets them apart is Lou Reed's ostrich guitar tuning, the electric viola by John Cale, and the droning tuning of John Cale on these songs as well. And again, Lou Reed's provocative lyrics that in rock music it was not heard at the time. The way the members use their very grinding, biting sound in some of these songs, but there are also moments of beauty and elegance in the songs like Femme Fatale, Sunday Morning, I'll Be Your Mirror, songs that have such pop elements, so the band knew how to use their pop elements and their grinding, underground, experimental elements as well. The song on this album called Run 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 has to be one of the most interesting songs on this album because Lou Reed has such a talent to displaying character tales of characters that are obsessed with drugs and characters that can't function well in society without drugs. And it really gives off this weird, dark, grim sort of environment and atmosphere. Of course, there are moments in this album that is like a little too much for me, especially the album's ending, which is kind of like a lot of like sounds playing at once. It kind of hurts my ears, but I do appreciate the overall experimental aspects of it and the band just kind of fooling around. This album's experimental nature, abrasive sound, Lou Reed's vocals and lyrics really changed the way I viewed music since I listened to this album. Before listening to this album, I knew that music had rules and had a sort of formula in order to make it popular and commercial. But what makes this album so unique to me is that this album is so much personality and has so much to do with them that they were able to make great music out of it. And it didn't matter whether or not it was commercial or not, or whether it was popular at the time. As long as they made what they made, they were still good and they were happy with that. They didn't want to comply and perform for people that want them to make the music that they want to make. They made it what they wanted to make, and I just am inspired by that, honestly. That is what this album's music taught me. I really genuinely thought that I was never gonna listen to this album again until last year, when like a weird, odd part of me wanted to re-listen to this album again. And after a re-listen, the light bulb switched in my head, and this album is good. The feeling was kind of similar to when you watched a boring movie from a long time ago, and then as years go by, you say to yourself, yeah, this movie was pretty good. Joni Mitchell's Blue. What an album. I listened to this album again after seeing every greatest albums of all time lists and every greatest albums polls and critics lists, and I saw the cover and I was like, let me just give this album a try. This album, I wasn't very much of a folk fan. I never really listened to folk ever in my life, so the fact that I saw it as like a folk or folk rock album, I was kind of like, I don't know if I want to listen to this. But I said, you know what, let me give this album a shot, and I'm glad I did because I love this album. Blue is undoubtedly one of the most saddest albums I have ever heard. Joni's songwriting has already been jerked off in music for decades, but her songwriting on this album is so beautiful and sad and moody, and the way that she talks about love and heartbreak and insecurities and relationships, I couldn't help but tear up when I was listening to this album for the first time. Of course, I knew this album was heartbreaking and sad on first listen, but I didn't really dig deep on Joni's lyrics. Really dig deep. I'm not saying that she had hidden double entendres or hidden messages on her songs. I just didn't grasp her poetry on the album. And when I read lyrics like this one and this one, I reacted like how I would react when a rapper spits a cool line on a rap song. And she does all this through a minimalist recording instrumentals, just being a guitar, piano, and dulcimer guitar that she uses perfectly. She doesn't overblow on her production on this album. At the time of listening to this album, I was personally going through some ex-romantic relationships at the time, and it felt like Joni was speaking through me on this album. It kind of hurts to talk about it. I feel like Joni's lyrics eloquently put down some really emotional feelings that I couldn't properly translate. Songs like All I Want really talks about how the fundamental core of being lovers is just to make each other feel better, make each other feel free. I also couldn't go on without talking about Joni's vocals on this album because her vocals are so beautiful and heavenly and gorgeous that I never heard a voice like that. I also recommend people to listen to the song A Case of You. It will guaranteed make you cry, and if you just got out of a relationship, I recommend, and I also don't recommend you listen to this song because it is so heartbreaking. My favorite lyric off this song being this one, and when I heard this one, tears and a sad sigh came out of my body. Joni also references the word blue on this album a lot, and obviously it relates to her sadness and depression. Joni Mitchell talks about so many universal topics of human emotion that I genuinely find it difficult for anybody to not like this album. Unless you are a sociopath, then yeah, you won't like this album. Finding this album in retrospect was like it was like taking a walk and finding a rare gem. A gem that you hold on to and keep with you forever. The only gripe, which isn't really a gripe that I have for this album, is that I can't listen to this album on the daily, because if I do, then I will just feel like a shriveled wet napkin filled with tears. So in culmination, Joni Mitchell's vocals, the instrumentation, her songwriting really changed how I viewed music and how it really impacts the human heart. And of course I had albums and songs that done that to me, but this album seems to be the number one album to do that for me. Thriller by Michael Jackson is my favorite album of all time, okay? I don't rank these albums. The albums that I've talked about, I don't rank them, and they're all 10 out of 10s for me. But if I was to rank just one album, it'll be this album. This album is number one. This album makes me feel like that for many reasons. Number one being that it hits me more on a nostalgia level, because this was the first album I listened to. It was the first vinyl I ever bought. It was the first CD I ever bought, and the album contains my favorite song ever, Billie Jean. I vividly remember being 6 years old, and YouTube was at its peak at the time. And I was watching various videos, of course, but when I saw Michael Jackson's Billie Jean performance at Motown and the Thriller music videos, I was pretty much a diehard stan at the moment. I watched Michael Jackson's videos on my mom's desktop every single day without fail, just staring at amazement and magic that he was. I could go on and on about this album really. The funky bass on Billie Jean, the harsh rock sound on Beat It, the nightmarish pop godliness on Thriller, the dreamy creamy pop R&B Give Me a Kiss song, PYT. It's all perfect. Michael Jackson was at his peak, in my opinion, at this moment. His dancing, stage presence, vocals, lyrical ability, songwriting, it was so perfect at that time that I wish I could go back at that time and really witness it for myself. Because Michael, he really proves to me how dreams could really come true. I even read how he wanted this album to be the best-selling album of all time, and he actually did it. Again, the reason why I have this opinion on Thriller and why it changed my view on music is that Michael proved to me how you can create literal magic on music. You know, you could rewire people's minds. You can create songs that stick in people's minds forever. And I never experienced that at the time. I was 7 years old? He was the only person I was listening to. If you saw me at 7 years old, you would see the Thriller seat at my right pocket. In all honesty, without this album, I probably wouldn't be who I am today. Alright, that's the end of this video. Again, make sure to like, comment, subscribe for more videos, and comment down below which albums changed the way you viewed music and changed the way how you listen to music on a personal level. This was Mark Arroyo. Farewell.